What if your salary was never designed to make you free? Not poor, not starving, just permanently participating. Because a strange thing happens the moment people start earning more money. At first, it feels like escape, the first real paycheck, the first upgraded apartment, the first vacation you paid for yourself, the first moment you stopped checking prices before ordering food. For a while, it feels like progress. Then something shifts. Quietly, the expenses begin catching up. Not all at once. That would be too obvious. A slightly better car, a slightly higher rent, a few subscriptions, a financed phone, weekend delivery apps, a gym membership you barely use but keep paying for because canceling somehow feels like failure. And one day, someone making 3 times more than they did 5 years ago is lying awake at 2 a.m., staring at a banking app, wondering why they still feel trapped. Not broke, trapped. And that feeling has become strangely common. Millions of people are earning more than their parents ever did while feeling less financially secure, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if the system works better when people never fully escape dependency? Because if you zoom out far enough, something strange becomes visible. Modern economies no longer revolve around ownership. They revolve around access. Access to housing, access to transportation, access to convenience, access to healthcare, access to entertainment, access to status. But access only works if payments continue. Miss enough payments, and modern life begins shutting off piece by piece. The car goes, the apartment goes, the subscriptions stop, the credit score drops, the stress rises, which means the real product being sold is not freedom. It's conditional participation. And the system is incredibly good at making this arrangement feel normal. Because salaries used to mean something different. Historically, income was tied more closely to accumulation. You worked, you saved, you owned things outright over time. A house, a car, assets, stability. The goal was gradual independence. For much of the 20th century, especially after World War II, many workers could realistically believe that consistent labor would slowly move them toward ownership. One income could often support a household. College was cheaper. Housing consumed a smaller percentage of income. Debt existed, but it had not yet swallowed everyday life. Then something changed. Productivity continued rising, but wages stopped keeping pace. And instead of solving that imbalance directly, the economy evolved around it. The solution became credit expansion. Instead of making things affordable, the system made them payable. That distinction changed everything, because a $90,000 car sounds absurd, but $740 a month sounds manageable. A $2,000 phone sounds excessive, but only $56 monthly feels harmless. A massive mortgage sounds terrifying, but low monthly payments feels achievable. The psychology completely changes when prices become subscriptions. And once society starts thinking in monthly payments instead of total cost, almost anything becomes sellable. Not because people suddenly became irresponsible, because the system optimized itself around cash flow extraction. That's the real mechanism. Modern capitalism realized something extremely important. One-time purchases create temporary revenue. Recurring payments create permanent revenue. So gradually, everything became recurring. Music, movies, software, storage, transportation, food, furniture, education, even basic survival itself increasingly behaves like a subscription service, and salaries became the fuel source feeding the entire machine. Which is why lifestyle inflation is so powerful. People often talk about lifestyle inflation like it's greed. Usually it isn't. It's adaptation. Humans normalize upgrades incredibly fast. Luxury becomes routine. Convenience becomes necessity. The temporary reward becomes baseline identity. And reversing that process feels emotionally painful. That's why someone earning 6 figures can still feel financially fragile. Because high income often creates high dependency. This is the part nobody likes talking about. A person earning $250,000 a year while spending $230,000 to maintain their system is not necessarily free. They're expensive. There's a difference, and modern professional culture quietly encourages this trap. The better salary, the nicer apartment, the professional image, the successful lifestyle, everything scales together until the lifestyle itself becomes impossible to leave behind. The Golden Handcuffs, where every raise improves your comfort while reducing your flexibility. And flexibility is what people are actually searching for, not luxury. The ability to say no. The ability to survive uncertainty without panic. The ability to leave a toxic job without your entire life collapsing 2 months later. That's what financial freedom psychologically means. Reduced dependency. But modern salary structures often move people in the opposite direction. Because debt doesn't just consume money, it consumes future time. That's the hidden mechanism underneath almost everything. A loan is not just financial, it's temporal. Debt is future labor pulled into the present. When someone finances a car for 7 years, they are committing future versions of themselves to maintain a decision made today. When someone signs a 30-year mortgage, they are effectively making a prediction about 3 decades of future stability. And modern economies increasingly normalize this arrangement. 30-year mortgages, decades of student debt, long-term financing, buy now, pay later system splitting purchases into invisible fragments. The future becomes collateral, and once enough future income is already promised away, people lose flexibility. They can't pause, can't experiment, can't tolerate instability, can't easily walk away. The machine has to keep being fed every month without interruption. And this changes workplace psychology too. A financially fragile employee behaves differently from a financially resilient one. They tolerate more stress, delay career changes, accept burnout more easily, stay in environments they hate longer than they otherwise would. Not because they're weak, because dependency changes incentives. And the system doesn't need this to be coordinated consciously. Economic systems naturally optimize around stability. Predictable workers, predictable consumers, predictable borrowers. The irony is that modern culture often celebrates the exact behaviors that deepen the trap. Overwork becomes ambition, stress becomes professionalism, exhaustion becomes status. People brag about never sleeping, as if burnout itself became a luxury product, and social media intensifies this even further. Because now people constantly consume each other's lifestyles, the vacations, the apartments, the expensive restaurants, the productivity setups, the luxury routines, an endless stream of visual comparison. And what's fascinating is that many people displaying wealth online are themselves financially fragile. Because visible consumption scales faster than invisible stability. Nobody posts low dependency, nobody flexes emergency savings, nobody uploads emotional peace. The algorithm rewards visible spending, so people optimize for appearances, and companies understand this extremely well. Modern advertising rarely sells products directly anymore. It sells identity. Cars are not transportation, they're status signal. Phones are not communication tools, they're social positioning devices. Luxury products are narrative objects. They communicate ambition, taste, success, importance, and salaries quietly fund the entire performance, which is why the trap becomes so difficult to recognize while living inside it. Because externally, everything can still look successful. The apartment looks impressive. The career looks impressive. The lifestyle looks impressive. But underneath the image is often enormous financial pressure. And maybe that's why so many people feel exhausted despite technically succeeding. Because modern life increasingly requires constant maintenance. The bills continue. The subscriptions continue. The expectations continue. And despite all the technological advancement supposedly making life easier, many people feel less secure, not more. Which sounds irrational until you realize efficiency doesn't automatically reduce dependency. Sometimes it expands systems faster. Technology made spending frictionless. One-click purchases. Instant financing. Algorithmic advertising. Auto-renewing subscriptions. The modern economy became extremely efficient at converting attention into recurring payments, and the process is so smooth that people barely notice it happening anymore. That's the brilliance of the system. It rarely feels oppressive. It feels convenient, comfortable, normal, which is why the salary trap becomes invisible. Most people are not collapsing. They're functioning, paying bills, going to work, upgrading slowly, repeating the cycle, which makes the system feel sustainable. But underneath that stability is a deeper fragility, because modern life increasingly depends on uninterrupted cash flow. Housing markets depend on it. Credit systems depend on it. Consumer spending depends on it. Entire industries depend on continuous participation. And that creates a strange economic reality. The system doesn't necessarily need people to become independent, it needs them to remain engaged, working, spending, borrowing, upgrading, repeating, not trapped badly enough to revolt, not free enough to leave, just stable enough to continue orbiting. And to be fair, the system did create extraordinary convenience. Modern life contains comforts previous generations could barely imagine. Instant communication, unlimited entertainment, fast delivery, digital infrastructure, advanced technology. The issue is not that modern capitalism produced nothing valuable. The issue is that its incentives increasingly reward dependency over independence. Because independent people are economically quieter, they borrow less, consume less, upgrade less frequently. Recurring dependence is simply more profitable, and once you see modern life through that lens, a lot of things begin making more sense. Why everything became subscription-based, why frictionless spending is prioritized everywhere, why people are encouraged to finance nearly everything, why success increasingly looks expensive instead of stable, and why so many people earning objectively good incomes still feel strangely anxious all the time. Because deep down, many of them understand something they struggle to say out loud. Their lifestyle only exists as long as the payments continue, which leads to the uncomfortable question underneath all of this. If an economy increasingly depends on permanent financial dependency to remain stable, what happens if too many people finally decide the orbit is no longer worth maintaining?